My name is David Begay. I was born along the outskirts of Shiprock, in the far northwestern edge of New Mexico, where the land holds silence like a secret and every shadow looks older than it should. I grew up surrounded by stories, not just the kind you pass around a fire, but the kind whispered under your breath when you think the night is listening. I served as a field ranger with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. My primary territory was deep Navajo Nation land, and it's hard to explain to outsiders just how remote that gets. We're not talking hiking trails or campsites. This is where even the satellite maps get fuzzy. Places that aren't marked on signs for a reason. I worked that job for over a decade. Through wildfire seasons, illegal digs, trespassers, and missing persons reports that never made the news. I've seen mountain lions tear through livestock and storms roll in without a cloud in the sky. I thought I'd seen what the land was capable of, but in 2011, something happened that I wasn't trained to understand, something I was warned never to speak of. But I'm going to speak now, because everyone keeps looking for the wrong thing. People hear the word skinwalker and their eyes widen, their voices drop. They think they've stumbled onto the scariest thing out there, and I get it. The stories are chilling, they always have been, but they're also a distraction. A warning sign posted near the entrance of a much deeper cave. You want the truth? What you fear isn't even close to the source. Skinwalkers are still human. Once, anyway. But what we're talking about now, this thing, it's not a curse. It's not even a being in the way we understand beings. It's a hunger, a memory that eats. I was stationed near T.E.'s Nazbas, assigned to patrol fire-restricted territory along a stretch of canyon where even local elders avoid setting foot after dark. It wasn't a heavily trafficked area. In fact, it was unusually still, even for summer. Animals had gone quiet, no deer, no bird song, nothing but the wind. I'd already noted 2 incidents that week, both strange, both unresolved. One was a livestock kill at a ranch just outside tribal boundary lines. All 5 sheep were gone from their pen, with no tracks in or out, no blood, no drag marks. Just gone. The second was a distress call from a camp north of Red Mesa. An older couple reported something circling their trailer each night, always stopping at exactly 3:12 a.m. Their dog refused to go outside, and they'd found fresh claw marks across their windows, too high up for any animal we know out here. I wrote both off as anomalies, until the call came in from a search party near the canyon ridge. A boy had gone missing the night before, 11 years old, wandered off during a family gathering. By the time I arrived, they'd found him, alone, standing barefoot in the brush, facing the canyon wall like he was listening to it breathe. He wasn't injured, but he wasn't right. He just stood there, eyes unfocused, jaw slightly open. When I stepped closer, I realized something else. His fingernails were gone, not clipped, torn. No blood, no visible pain, just raw skin, like he'd scratched at stone for hours, or like someone else had removed them, carefully, one by one. That's when the medicine men arrived. 2 of them, older than the cliffs, it seemed. I knew one by reputation, Tom Nez, a respected healer from Kayenta who only left his home when something serious was happening. He didn't approach the boy right away. Instead, he circled the area. He laid tobacco at 4 corners of the site. Then finally, he pulled me aside. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. He just looked me in the eye and said, "You're looking for the wrong thing." I thought he meant a person, a suspect, an abductor. So I asked him directly, "What are we dealing with?" He didn't blink. Something old, something that doesn't need to kill to take. I felt a chill then. Not fear exactly, but like the wind had shifted through my bones. He opened a small pouch from around his neck and placed something in my hand, wrapped tight in deer hide and bound with sinew. "Keep this on you. Do not open it. If you hear your own voice in the dark, leave." I stared at him. "Your own voice," he said again. He left it at that. I followed procedure, filed the incident, logged the pouch in my personal gear, untouched. And then over the next few nights, things started to change. I'd hear footsteps outside my cabin, slow, deliberate, but when I stepped out with my flashlight, there was nothing. No prints, no movement, just stillness. Then came the voices. Not shouts, not whispers, but full sentences, repeated exactly. The first night it said, "David, come here." Soft, just beyond the tree line, but it was my voice. Next night, I found something. "Bring a light." Still mine. By the third night, I didn't open the door at all. Let me make something clear. This wasn't a prank. There's no one out there playing tricks miles from civilization, mimicking my voice like that. It wasn't a radio. I checked. Wasn't a trick of memory either, because the words it used, they were things I'd said before, years earlier. Almost like it was pulling them from me. This thing, whatever it is, doesn't attack you in the way you expect. It doesn't leap out from the trees or howl in the dark. It waits, it watches, and then it becomes you. The medicine men had a word for it, but they never said it out loud, just nodded to each other when I described what I'd heard. And all they would say was, "It wears what it kills, but only when the soul forgets who it was." That's the part that still keeps me up. Not the voice, not the to lose your rhythm, your memories, your rituals, and then it steps in, and no one around you knows you're gone. That boy from the canyon, he still doesn't speak. He lives with his aunt now, and sometimes she calls me, just to tell me the new things he's doing. Last month, she said she heard him humming something strange, a pattern, a tune she couldn't place. When she hummed it back to him, he turned slowly and said, "That's your song, Auntie. I took it from you." She told me she hasn't slept since. You can ignore these stories. You can roll your eyes. But I'm not telling this for the skeptics. I'm telling this for the ones who've heard their own voice in the dark and know they didn't speak. This is Volume 2. These stories come from men and women who lived through things that no textbook, no training, no protocol could ever prepare you for. If skinwalkers scare you, you're nowhere near ready. What we're facing now, it doesn't walk on two legs. It doesn't chant or howl. It remembers you. It waits until you don't. If you've made it this far, you're exactly who we made this for. Subscribe to MindFuel. There's more, much more. And each testimony brings us closer to something none of us were ever supposed to uncover. Stay with us. The next account begins shortly. I want to tell you about something that happened in northern Minnesota, deep in the boundary lands of the Ojibwe. It's cold country. The kind of place where silence isn't empty, it presses against you. Some winters, even the wolves keep their distance. This isn't my story. It was sent in by a man who asked us to use only his first name, Jonah. He's a tribal hunter, grew up on stories passed down through 5 generations, maybe more. Not just the ones elders use to scare kids into behaving. I mean the real ones. The ones no one repeats, unless the night is long, the fire is steady, and the people listening know when not to ask questions. Jonah didn't believe in monsters. He told me that himself, said the land is hard enough as it is. You don't need to make up reasons to respect it. But what happened in the winter of 2004 changed everything. He and his younger brother Isaac had been hunting out near a frozen marsh that locals just call the Thinning. It's a strange patch of land. Pines grow taller there, but twisted. Light bends oddly, even in full daylight. Jonah said it's always 10 degrees colder near the center, and always quiet. No birds, no signs, just stillness. They'd been tracking a set of snowshoe hare tracks when Isaac stopped. Said something was watching them. Jonah laughed, said he was being paranoid. They were miles from the nearest road, and their footprints were the only ones around. But Isaac didn't move. He kept staring at the tree line across the marsh. "There's something there," he said. "It's not hiding. It wants us to see it." Jonah humored him, raised his scope, scanned the edge of the woods, and there it was, a figure, tall, thin, unmoving, not crouched, not hunched, just standing. Its limbs didn't shift with the wind. It didn't blink. Jonah said it looked like a man, but wrong, too long, too narrow, like something had tried to stretch a body past its limit and then left it out there to dry. Jonah turned to say something to his brother, but Isaac was already walking away, back toward camp. Jonah followed, trying to laugh it off, told him it was probably a stump, maybe a burned tree trunk, but Isaac wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat that night either. That should have been the end of it. Except 3 days later, Jonah woke up in the tent, and Isaac was gone. No sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry, just the tent flap unzipped, the snow outside undisturbed, except for bare footprints. Not socked, not booted, just Isaac's bare feet, in sub-zero temperatures. Jonah followed the tracks until they began to loop, first in a wide circle, then smaller, then tighter, like Isaac had just walked in place, over and over, like something told him not to leave that spot. He followed the circles for over a mile, and then the prints stopped. No body, no blood, curled into the hollow of a fallen birch, clothes soaked but intact, lips blue but breathing. He was alive, but something was wrong. At first, they thought it was exposure. Isaac's skin was cold. He didn't speak, wouldn't look at anyone directly, just kept muttering the same 3 words. "All teeth, hollow." They warmed him, took him back, and for a while, it seemed like he was recovering. But then the strange behaviors began. Isaac wouldn't eat meat, wouldn't sit near the fire, refused to sleep indoors. When someone tried offering him venison, he flinched, like it burned his eyes to look at it. He only spoke at night, only in riddles, said things like, "The mouth with no stomach still chews. The wind walks with skin now. You can't hear the hunger until it stops pretending." And then, just as suddenly as he came back, he was gone again. Disappeared during a thunderstorm. This time there were no footprints, no sign he'd even left his bedroll, just a half-buried pile of pine needles in his shape. And something else. Jonah found deep scratch marks beneath the wooden eaves of their cabin, long, thin, like fingernails, but higher than Isaac could reach, and they were on the inside. Jonah told me something I can't stop thinking about. He said, "I don't think it took him. I think it became him, and the boy we brought back was just the skin it needed to get inside." He's not the only one who said that. Other rangers, other elders, they talk about the wendigo like it's more than a story. It doesn't just hunger, it waits, watches. It studies people, listens to how they speak, learns their rhythms, until it can wear them. Not to hunt, but to live among us, to walk past you on the street, to learn what you love, to become what you trust. That's the story Jonah gave us, one of many, and whether or not you believe it, ask yourself this. If a creature could survive by becoming the one person you'd never question, how would you know? This is Volume 2, and this is just the beginning. There are more stories, sent from the edge of forgotten forests and sealed borders, from voices that still echo in places maps don't bother naming anymore. If you're still with us, subscribe to MindFuel, because you haven't heard the worst yet, and the next voice might be the last real one you'll ever trust. Some stories don't come from the woods. They come from home, from the safe, familiar rooms where we're supposed to be protected, where the ones who raised us left their presence in worn blankets and photos on the wall. That's what makes this next account harder to tell, because it didn't start with a stranger. It started with someone she loved. This story was sent to us from a woman who asked to remain anonymous. She grew up on the Hopi Reservation, out in the mesas of northern Arizona. Her family had lived there for generations, tight-knit, observant, deeply rooted in their traditions. She was 8 years old the year it happened. Her grandmother, whom she'd been close with, had passed unexpectedly a month earlier. And like many Hopi households, They'd followed every proper ritual, burned cedar, sealed mirrors, avoided speaking her name for a time. The girl was told that her grandmother's spirit had moved on properly, that she was at peace. But then, one afternoon after school, she came home to find her grandmother waiting, sitting calmly at the kitchen table, hands folded, smiling. The girl said nothing at first, just stared. The woman looked exactly like her. Same soft eyes, same long gray braid, same handmade turquoise ring on her left hand. She reached out and said, "You're late, little bird. I was waiting." The girl blinked, confused. She knew her grandmother was gone. She'd watched the fire herself, but in her heart, she wanted this to be real. She stepped forward. The woman touched her cheek, and that's when she noticed the smell. Not perfume, not earth, but smoke and sage, burned, not fresh, like ashes pressed into cloth. The woman began visiting her every day after school, always when her parents weren't home yet, always sitting in the same chair, always asking strange questions. What's the taste of bones? Do dreams bleed if you cut them? Do you still sleep with the bear I gave you? The girl answered, even when the questions made no sense, because it was still her grandmother's voice, soft, familiar. But it wasn't until the fourth day that she realized the woman never blinked. That night, the woman asked her to go for a walk, said she had something to show her in the woods beyond the ridge. The girl hesitated, but she'd followed her grandmother on walks before. It was normal, comforting. She didn't even bring a flashlight. They crossed the field behind the house, past the old fence, and moved into the trees. The woman didn't hold her hand this time, just walked ahead, silent, barefoot, moving too smoothly. Eventually the girl stopped. Something didn't feel right. The woman didn't have a shadow. She turned to run, but the ground beneath her gave way. She fell, not far, just enough to hit her knees and knock the wind from her chest. She'd landed in a pit. At first, it looked like a dug-out hide or some old game trap. Many were broken, faces cracked, limbs missing. Some were hanging from nails. Some had their eyes stitched shut. And between them, skulls. Small ones, some animal, some not. The air was thick. Not just with dust, but with something older. A hum. Not a sound exactly, but a sensation. Like her name was being whispered by things that didn't have mouths. She screamed. No one answered. The woman peered down from above. "You're a good listener," she said. "That's why I picked you." And then she smiled. Too wide, wider than the bones should allow. And the smell of ash poured into the pit like fog. That's when the light broke through. A flame, held high above the pit, and a voice, low, rhythmic, chanting something in Hopi. A traditional healer, a Kikmungwi, had come. He'd felt a shift, sensed something wrong with the wind. He'd visited the house, found it empty, and followed the trail. The woman vanished like smoke. The dolls fell, and the girl was pulled from the pit, shivering, eyes wide and wet with terror. They cleansed her, the house, the land. The healer performed rites for 7 days. They never asked what she saw. They already knew. Later, an elder told the family this: "Some spirits imitate the ones we love, but they feed off that love until there's nothing left but a shell. They wait until you forget that the dead don't come back through doors." The girl recovered, but she never again answered the door when she was alone, and she never kept dolls in her room, not after she saw what they could become. So what was it? Some kind of shapeshifter? A trickster? A mimic drawn to grief? There's no clear answer, only this: it knew her heart, it knew what to wear, and it knew when she'd be most willing to believe. Some say evil wears rage like a mask, but sometimes it wears a smile, and sometimes it sounds like the voice that used to read you bedtime stories. This is volume 2 of the things no one wants to remember, because if we remember them, they might come back. Subscribe to MindFuel if you haven't already. These stories are real. They come from the mouths of those who lived them, and the further we go, the harder it gets to look away. Some names were never meant to be spoken. Some sounds were never meant to be returned. That's the lesson they learned too late. In a clearing that used to be a lodge site, out near the tree line in Blackfeet Nation, Montana. This story came from one of the boys who survived. He's older now, a father himself. But when he talks about what happened that night, he doesn't raise his voice. He just stares at the floor, as if he can still hear it. They were teenagers, 6 of them. Local kids looking to camp out for the weekend, away from their parents, away from curfews, with nothing but cheap gear, flashlights, and stories to pass the time. They'd chosen a spot that had a kind of legend to it. An old abandoned lodge, mostly collapsed, rumored to be haunted. The elders didn't like them going there. Said it wasn't just old, it was wrong. That the trees had grown back strange, and that the wind didn't behave normally out there. But teenagers don't listen, and legends feel less dangerous when you've got s'mores and a signal on your phone. The first night was normal. A fire, laughter, a few ghost stories. And then, just after midnight, they heard it. A whistle. Not random. Not the wind. 3 notes. Low. Low. High. Spaced out. Deliberate. Like someone was practicing just out of view. They paused. Listened. One of them, Marcus, laughed and said, "Maybe we just summoned Bigfoot." Then, without warning, he whistled back. The same pattern. Low. Low. High. Everyone froze. Then laughed. Teenagers. Nothing had happened. Just a joke. Until they heard it again. Closer this time. Low. Low. High. No footsteps. No rustling. Just the sound. Like it slid through the trees. Perfectly clear. They didn't sleep much that night. Laughed it off, even as they kept flashlights nearby. By morning, the tension had passed. They packed their gear, did some short hiking, tried to act normal. But that night, the second night, is when things changed. They found a rabbit just outside the tent, mutilated, but not eaten. No blood, just opened up and laid out like a diagram, organs arranged neatly on moss, like it had been done with care or ritual. And then, around 3 a.m., the tent flaps began to flutter from the inside. They woke up to scratching sounds from within the tent walls, not claws, not knives, fingers. Marcus yelled, unzipped the tent, nothing there. But his pack had been torn open, from the inside, and again, the whistle. Low, low, high. This time just beyond the ring of the firelight. They packed up the next morning. One of the boys wanted to leave immediately, but Marcus refused, said it was all just a prank. That night, the others gave in. They turned in early. The search lasted a week. They never found Marcus, never found footprints. But every night during that search, someone reported hearing the same whistle from different places in the forest. Low, low, high. Once, a search dog howled and bolted, was found the next day in the treetops, dead, laid out like the rabbit. That's when the elders stepped in. They brought the remaining boys in, lit cedar and tobacco, and told them the name, Hanuk, the hollow whistler. A mimic, a parasite of sound, not a spirit, not a ghost, something older. A being that has no voice of its own. It waits, listens, then uses your voice, your sound, your rhythm. One of the elders said this: "It has no voice of its own. It steals yours. Once you answer its call, you're part of its song, and it doesn't stop until you're gone." Some say Marcus isn't dead, that he's still walking the tree line, still whistling, but not to come back, not to be rescued, to bring more in. Because once Hanuk gets your voice, it doesn't need to come looking anymore. It lets you do the calling. So if you're ever out there, camping, hiking, walking alone, and you hear that whistle, low, low, high, don't answer, don't repeat it, don't even breathe. because it only needs an invitation. And once it's in, it's already wearing your voice. This is MindFuel, and this is Volume 2. You've heard the stories that don't make the news, that don't get written down, because if they did, someone might hear them the wrong way. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are still stories to tell, and voices we haven't heard from yet, because they were taken. They say there's a cave out there, hidden behind a veil of sandstone and memory, where the sun doesn't reach and even the wind forgets to howl. A place old enough to remember when names still held power, and when men believed fire could purify more than just sin. This isn't a story I lived myself. It was passed to me, first through a tribal historian, then confirmed quietly by two separate elders who wouldn't speak of it in full daylight. It begins in the late 1500s, during the Spanish push into what is now New Mexico. Back then, the invaders had a cruel custom. They'd seek out sacred sites, ceremonial grounds, burial caves, spirit wells, and either claim them in the name of the church or burn them to the ground. But not this cave. Not this time. The warrior's name is lost, not because he didn't earn remembrance, but because naming him now would call him. The oral story only describes him in metaphor, the one who held fire in his hands and fed it his name. According to the tale, when the soldiers came marching with their torches and muskets, he stood at the cave's mouth alone. They told him to step aside. He refused, said something the younger generations still repeat to this day: "You may take the earth, but not what sleeps beneath it." Then, without a sound, he drenched himself in pitch and lit the torch himself. They say he didn't scream, just walked straight into the dark of that cave, body ablaze, carrying the flame into the one place they weren't meant to reach. The soldiers turned back. Some fled, a few never made it home. That was centuries ago, but the land never forgot. Fast forward to 1997. A hiker, name withheld by request, was mapping petroglyphs near the sandstone cliffs west of the Rio Grande Gorge. He wasn't tribal, but respectful, experienced too. He told rangers he'd followed a strange set of hoof-shaped impressions in the dry soil. No animals nearby, no herds for miles, and yet the tracks led to a narrow crevice, half-choked with thorn bush and blackened stone. He went inside. What happened in the next 30 minutes is stitched together from his own journal, his emergency call, and a brief visit with a traditional healer days later. The man came back barely conscious, shoes melted, fingertips singed down to blood. He spoke in fits, repeating one phrase again and again, even as the paramedics tried to sedate him. He guards the gate, but he's not alone anymore. The EMT said the man's skin was burned, but not in a way fire usually acts. There was no clear source, no matches, no lighters, no accelerant, just raw, cracked flesh, as if the burns had come from within. A week later, he stopped talking altogether. His sister told authorities he started sleeping with his eyes open, mouth filled with ash. He moved away from the state shortly after, never returned. His GPS data and field notes were quietly confiscated by a Pueblo official. The site itself has since been claimed. Not officially, but anyone who spent time in the area knows which trail to avoid. It's the one with no wind, the one where the cactus never bloom. Every few years, a drone or a curious student ignores the unspoken boundary. Some go missing, others come back confused. One recent visitor, an anthropology grad student from Denver, was found trembling at the bus station, shoes worn to threads, legs bleeding. He didn't say a word, just held a charred stone wrapped in corn husk and left it on the floor before disappearing into the crowd. Locals now refer to it as the gate. Not a cave, not a shrine, just the last threshold between what lived and what was bound. But lately, elders have noticed something else, something disturbing. The scorched footprints, they've started appearing further out, not just near the entrance, not just on ash, on dirt, on gravel. Once, even on the painted concrete of a reservation sidewalk. They say fire doesn't forget, that the one who gave himself to protect the sacred may not be the only thing walking near that gate anymore. Something else has entered, something the fire didn't burn away. and whatever it is, it walks with him. I came across the linguist's work through a weathered collection of field notes, left behind in a box labeled only with the symbol of a circle split in three, like a peace sign with its edges chewed away. The man behind the research was Dr. Reuben Hale, an indigenous linguist with mixed ancestry, Navajo, Lakota, and Tlingit, who had spent over a decade tracing shared oral traditions between scattered tribes across the continent. But there was one entry that began appearing again and again, across regions and languages, always shrouded in metaphor, always spoken with hesitation. The Eater of Names. It wasn't a creature with flesh or fur, not something that could be trapped, tracked, or repelled. According to Hale's notes, it was an ancient concept, a force of forgetting. It would manifest as a black silhouette with limbs that didn't move, didn't sway, didn't even seem to exist until you noticed they were made of something unnatural. Antlers twisted from rows of human arms, fingers stiff as branches. Dr. Hale first encountered mention of it in a Lakota prayer song, one that skipped an entire verse when sung aloud. Elders said the missing words were never forgotten. They were eaten. What followed in his research were months of increasingly fractured journal entries. Hale would reference interviews he never recorded, field visits he had no photos of. One day he wrote, "Interviewed grandmother Josephine today. Spoke of the Eater, but she grew silent when I asked its name. Said I'd already spoken it. Said I needed to leave before I forgot my mother." The next page was blank. Then came scrawled lines, hastier handwriting. He started leaving reminders for himself, post-it notes stuck to the inside of his laptop. One of them simply read, "Your daughter's name is Kiara. She's 8. She has a gap in her front teeth. She loves thunderstorms." Then, later, "If you don't remember her, stop reading." But he didn't stop. Audio cassettes surfaced from a dusty archive box stored in the basement of an old tribal university building. They were part of a forgotten lecture series, though the final recordings weren't lectures at all. They were voice memos. In the first tape, his voice is firm, analytical. He describes cross-regional references to an entity whose name is forbidden. Mentions that in Navajo stories, names are power, but can also be weight. The wrong name, especially one not earned, can attract something that consumes identity like dry rot in wood. In Tlingit myth, he finds a similar figure called Taakshgunayi, shadow that eats itself. It's never painted, never drawn. Not because it's taboo, but because trying to depict it pulls it through. In Lakota legend, it is said to travel without sound, without wind, its arrival only marked by absence, missing faces from group photos, voices no longer heard in prayer circles, struggles with words like daughter or Seattle or even coffee. By the 5th, he begins each entry by asking, "What was I doing again?" In one heartbreaking segment, we hear him mumble, "I had a dog, right? Big ears. What was its name? What was its name?" The 6th tape begins in silence, then comes a long exhale, then his voice, not frantic, resigned. "If you're hearing this, I said it. I'm sorry." The tape ends. No known video of Hale exists after that. His office was found abandoned, shelves cleared, a sticky note left behind on the inside of a filing cabinet. "Do not file under E. It listens." When researchers went to contact the family for archival permission, no records existed of a daughter named Kiara. No mention of Hale in birth registries after 1992, and the final page of his field journal, written in a trembling, slanted script, contained just one thing: "I can't remember what I've forgotten." And underneath that, a sketch, a silhouette, tall and stiff with branching arms, all fingers, all reaching. You've heard of skinwalkers. The stories haunt every campfire, every reservation, every quiet conversation when the night feels just a little too heavy. But the elders say something few dare to repeat aloud, that skinwalkers, weren't monsters at all. They were warriors. A long, long time ago, before written language, before white settlers, before the migration over the ice bridge, there was a war. Not one fought with weapons, but with memory. The shape changers were not cursed in the beginning. They were made, created by the old tribes to hunt something far worse. Beings that didn't have skin, didn't have form. They lived in sound, in story. They came when you said their names aloud. And they stayed if you remembered them too long. The Hopi called them Tuveni, those who wait below. The Navajo whispered of Chani, the hidden breath. The Lakota had no name at all, only silence and the circle drawn in ash. One tale passed down in broken pieces tells of a village where every child went mute. Not out of fear, but because something else had begun speaking through them. Another speaks of the mountain that no one climbs. Because the rocks there don't echo your voice, they answer it. But perhaps the most chilling came from a fragmented oral legend on the Tlingit coast. It spoke of a cave, only visible during the blood moon, where the air hums. The story says, it's not humming, it's listening. Skinwalkers were the sentries. Their transformations, grotesque as they seemed, were necessary to fight what came before. Because whatever those old ones were, they had no voice of their own, so they stole ours. Tell them, and they wake. They couldn't be killed, only contained, only forgotten. But now, we tell their stories. We say their names on podcasts, on stages, on screens that reach millions. We think we're preserving culture. We think we're honoring the past. But every retelling is like a match struck in a dry forest. Every word brings them closer. Skinwalkers are terrifying, but they were made to fight what came before. The shapeshifters were warriors, but something beat even them. That's what we're up against now. That's what we're up against now. What we're up against now, against now. So listen carefully, not to me, but to the air around you. Because if the story echoes back when you finish listening, it's already too late. Every time you tell their story, they grow stronger. These stories were never meant for entertainment. Not really. They weren't made for the spotlight, or the stage, or the screen. They were told in hushed voices, around fires no one dared let die out, passed between generations like medicine or warnings. Because long before we wrote them down, long before we turned them into content, they served a purpose. To remember what hunts in the dark, and to keep it there. But memory has a price. You've listened. You know the names now. You've pictured the places. You've followed their footprints in your mind. And that makes you part of the remembering. From now on, when your power flickers for no reason, when you hear your name whispered in the woods, when your reflection seems just a little too slow, you'll remember this, because they will. The ones who live in sound, in story, in silence between syllables, they've heard you listening. You can turn off the screen, you can close the app, but you can't unhear it. And if you feel watched tonight, you're not imagining it. We know you now. This has been MindFuel. These were true accounts, told to remember, told to warn. And now, they know you remember too.